The gunshot cracked like thunder across the Arizona desert. Kate Sullivan screamed as the man holding her at gunpoint jerked backward, his weapon clattering to the dust. Blood bloomed across his hand where the bullet had struck true. "Step away from the lady!" A deep voice cut through the gun smoke. Kate turned to see a stranger on horseback, rifle still raised, his gray eyes locked on her captor with deadly intent. She didn't know it yet, but that single shot would change everything. This is the story of how a desperate widow on an auction block found redemption in the Arizona Territory of 1883. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth of Wilcox, Arizona Territory, painting everything in shades of dust and desperation. It was 1883, and the frontier was still a place where fortunes could be made or lost on the turn of a card, the swing of a pickaxe, or the whim of a powerful man. Catherine Sullivan stood on a makeshift wooden platform in the town square, her hands clasped tightly before her knuckles white beneath the fabric of her worn traveling gloves. Around her a crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, pity, and barely concealed contempt. The platform had been erected just that morning, hastily constructed from rough planks that still smelled of fresh sawdust and pine resin. This was not an auction for land or livestock. This was something far more degrading. "Ladies and gentlemen of Wilcox," called out Reverend Thomas Wade, his voice carrying across the square with practiced authority. The Reverend was a tall man in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair and a face that looked perpetually troubled. "We gather today in Christian charity to help this unfortunate widow find her place in our community." Kate lifted her chin slightly, refusing to bow her head despite the weight of shame pressing down upon her shoulders. She had learned in Boston that dignity was sometimes all a woman had left, and she would not surrender it, not even here, not even now. The crowd murmured. Kate recognized some faces from her brief time in town. Mrs. Agnes Whitmore stood in the front row, her expression one of righteous satisfaction. The woman's elaborate hat, decorated with ostrich feathers and silk flowers, spoke of wealth and status. Her eyes, however, spoke of something far less charitable. "Mrs. Catherine Sullivan," the Reverend continued, and Kate noticed the slight hesitation before he spoke her married name, as if it carried a stain that might transfer to his tongue. "Educated in the finest schools of Boston, skilled in the domestic arts, a widow seeking honest work and Christian guidance." "Ask her how her husband died," a voice called from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the assembly like wind through dry grass. Kate's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Dragoon Mountains rose purple and distant against the cloudless sky. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The Reverend cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, good people, we are here to help, not to judge." "Seems judgment's already been passed, Reverend," another voice called out. "Why else would a lady from Boston end up on an auction block in the Arizona Territory?" More laughter. Kate felt the heat rising to her cheeks, but whether from shame or anger she could not say. Perhaps both. This was how far she had fallen. Just 6 weeks ago she had been Mrs. Catherine Sullivan of Beacon Hill, wife of James Sullivan, a man of business and reputation. Then had come the revelation of his debts, his schemes, his lies. Then had come his death, a pistol shot in his study, and the creditors descending like vultures on everything she had ever known. His family had turned her out without a cent, claiming she must have known about the fraud, must have been complicit in the schemes that had ruined a dozen investors and left the Sullivan name in tatters. The courts had taken everything. Her home, her possessions, even her wedding ring had been sold to satisfy debts she had not known existed. All she had left was a single letter yellowed with age from her Aunt Grace. A woman she had met only twice as a child, a woman who had left Boston for the frontier decades ago and had never returned. The letter had arrived just days before the final judgment, as if Providence itself had offered one last lifeline. "My dear Catherine," the letter had read in her aunt's careful script. "If you should ever find yourself in difficulty, know that you have family in Wilcox. I have a millinery shop here and a small piece of land. It is not much, but it is yours if you should need it. Come west, child. The frontier judges a person by what they make of themselves, not by what they inherit. So Kate had come west traveling by rail and then by stagecoach, her entire worldly possessions fitting into a single worn carpet bag. She had arrived in Wilcox 3 days ago, stepping down from the dusty coach with hope still flickering in her chest. That hope had died quickly. The shop was shuttered and locked, a notice posted on the door declaring the property under review by the town council. Her aunt, she learned from the boarding house proprietress, had died a month earlier. Fell from the cabin she kept north of town, they said. Broke her neck. A tragic accident. But Mrs. Eleanor Price, who ran the boarding house with quiet efficiency and saw more than she spoke, had whispered warnings. "Mr. Blackwood has his eye on that property, dear. He claimed your aunt owed money to his bank. I'd advise you to leave Wilcox while you still can." Kate had not left. Could not leave. This inheritance, however small, was all she had in the world. Without it, she had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, no resources to fall back upon. So she had gone to the town council, had demanded to see the records, had insisted on her rights as Grace Bennett's only living heir. That had been her mistake. Emmett Blackwood, chairman of the town council and owner of the First Bank of Wilcox, had listened to her petition with a smile that never reached his cold gray eyes. He was a handsome man in his early 50s, silver threading through his dark hair, his suits tailored and expensive even by Boston standards. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never been told no and who would not accept it even if he were. "Mrs. Sullivan," he had said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I sympathize with your situation, truly I do. But your aunt's debts to my bank must be satisfied before any inheritance can be claimed. $800 plus interest accrued over 6 months. Kate had felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I need to see the original loan documents." Blackwood's smile had widened. "Unfortunately, those records were destroyed in a small fire at the bank just after your aunt's passing. A terrible coincidence, but these things happen on the frontier." It was a lie. Kate had known it with the same certainty she had known about her husband's deceptions recognized too late. But she had no proof, no leverage, no allies in this dusty town where Emmett Blackwood's word was law. "The Reverend has suggested a charitable solution," Blackwood had continued. "A bride auction. There are many good men in this territory in need of wives, and you, my dear, are in need of protection and provision. A marriage could solve both problems quite neatly." Kate had refused, of course, had stood before the council and stated clearly that she would not be bartered like livestock, would not surrender her dignity for the sake of convenience. Blackwood's expression had hardened, then the veneer of civility cracking to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "Pride is a luxury you can no longer afford, Mrs. Sullivan. You have no money, no prospects, and no family to turn to. I am offering you a chance to survive. I suggest you take it before it is withdrawn." And so here she stood 2 days later on a platform in the town square, waiting to see which desperate cowboy or lonely rancher would bid on her like a piece of furniture. The Reverend was speaking again, his voice droning on about Christian duty and the sanctity of marriage. Kate stopped listening. She focused instead on breathing, on keeping her spine straight and her expression neutral. She would endure this. She had endured worse. "Shall we begin the bidding at $100? The Reverend asked, though his tone suggested he expected no such sum. Silence greeted his question. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. $75 then. More silence. Kate felt something cold settling in her stomach. This was worse than being bid upon. This was being rejected publicly and completely. $50. Surely there is a Christian man here willing to offer $50 for a respectable woman in need of honest work. The silence stretched out, broken only by the whisper of wind through the town's single cottonwood tree and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Someone in the crowd laughed, a cruel sound that cut through the stillness. Others joined in, and Kate felt the last threads of her composure beginning to fray. $30. The Reverend said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. $30 and the blessings of the church. Mrs. Whitmore's voice rang out clear and sharp. "Why should any decent man pay good money for damaged goods? Everyone knows her husband was a thief and a fraud. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I say." Kate's hands clenched into fists. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. "That's quite enough, Agnes," the Reverend said, but his rebuke lacked conviction. $20 then," he announced, and Kate heard the defeat in his voice. "Surely someone will offer $20. The crowd began to disperse, men shaking their heads, women whispering behind gloved hands. The humiliation was complete. Kate Sullivan, who had once dined with Boston's elite, who had attended the finest finishing schools, who had danced in ballrooms that could fit this entire dusty town inside them, was not worth even $20 in the eyes of Wilcox, Arizona territory. She had started to turn to step down from the platform and walk away with what little dignity she could salvage, when a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. $500. The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward in waves of shock. The crowd fell silent. Even the blacksmith's hammer ceased its ringing. Kate turned, her heart suddenly pounding. Standing at the back of the crowd was a man she had seen only once before 3 days ago, outside the town council meeting. Samuel Hartford. He stood with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, one hand resting on the pommel of the Colt revolver at his hip, the other holding the hand of a young boy who looked up at him with adoring eyes. Hartford was perhaps 35, with the weathered face of a man who spent his days under the harsh Arizona sun. His clothes were simple working man's garb, but clean and well-maintained. A battered Stetson shaded eyes of startling gray that seemed to see more than they revealed. The crowd parted as he walked forward, boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. The boy, who could not have been more than 8 or 9, walked beside him trying to match his stride. "Mr. Hartford," the Reverend said clearly, as shocked as everyone else. "Did you say $500? "I did." Hartford's voice was deep and measured, carrying the faint accent of Texas. "Unless there's a reason my money's not good here." Emmett Blackwood pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "This is highly irregular, Hartford. You weren't registered for the auction." Hartford's gray eyes fixed on Blackwood with an intensity that made the banker take an involuntary step backward. "You saying you won't take my money? Blackwood seems odd for a banker to turn down gold." Blackwood's jaw worked, but he could not refuse without losing face in front of the entire town. "Of course not. But such a sum for someone you don't even know." "I know enough." Hartford's gaze shifted to Kate, and she saw something in those gray eyes that she had not expected. Respect. "I know she stood up to you in that council meeting. Takes courage to stand against power when you got nothing to back you up. That's worth something in my book." The Reverend cleared his throat. "Well then, if there are no other bids, I declare Mrs. Catherine Sullivan sold to Mr. Samuel Hartford for the sum of $500. The word "sold" stuck in Kate's throat like a fishbone. Hartford extended his hand to help her down from the platform. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked for his living. "Thank you," Kate managed to whisper as her feet touched solid ground. "Don't thank me yet, ma'am. We need to talk terms." The crowd was dispersing, now disappointed that the spectacle had ended so anticlimactically. Mrs. Whitmore cast one last venomous look at Kate before sweeping away in a rustle of expensive fabric. Blackwood stood watching them, his expression unreadable, before turning on his heel and striding toward the bank. The boy tugged on Hartford's sleeve. "Is she coming home with us, Uncle Sam?" "That's up to her, Josh. Let's give the lady a chance to catch her breath first." Hartford guided Kate away from the town square toward a quieter side street where a hitching post held a patient sorrel mare. The boy Joshua skipped ahead, kicking at stones. "I suppose you want to know my story," Kate said, trying to keep her voice steady. Hartford shrugged. "Your story's your own business, ma'am. What I need to know is whether you're willing to work for your keep." Kate stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Mr. Hartford, I need to understand what just happened. You paid $500 for, what exactly? For the right to offer you honest work without Blackwood's interference. for the chance to get you out from under that man's thumb before he did something worse than humiliate you in public. And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Hartford removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. His weathered face showed the lines of a man who had known grief and learned to live with it. "I get a housekeeper who can maybe teach my nephew there some manners. Someone to help run my ranch without me having to worry about whether they're going to steal me blind or run off with the first passing cowhand. And maybe, just maybe, someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and have to start over." There was something in his voice and the careful way he spoke that told Kate this man knew about loss. Real loss, the kind that carved holes in your chest and never quite healed. "How do you know I won't steal you blind?" she asked. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Because you stood on that platform with your head high when you could have broken down. Because you told Emmett Blackwood to his face that you'd rather sleep on the street than take his charity. That's not a woman who steals. That's a woman with backbone." Joshua had returned to stand beside his uncle, looking up at Kate with curious eyes. "Are you going to come live with us? Uncle Sam needs help. He burns the biscuits." Despite everything, Kate felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Does he now?" "Every time. They're like rocks. Sometimes we throw them at coyotes." Hartford coughed a sound that might have been suppressing a laugh. "Josh, why don't you go check on Copper, make sure her saddle's still tight?" The boy ran off to tend to the mare, leaving the adults alone. "I have a proposition, Mrs. Sullivan," Hartford said, his voice quiet enough that no passing townsperson could overhear. "I need someone to help run my household and look after Josh. You need a safe place and honest work. I'm offering $20 a month plus room and board for 6 months of work. After that we renegotiate, or you're free to go, no questions asked. And the $500 you just paid? Consider it an investment in making sure Blackwood knows you're under my protection. He won't touch what's mine." Kate studied his face, searching for any hint of the ulterior motives she had learned to expect from men. But Hartford's expression remained open honest. There was no leer in his eyes, no suggestion of impropriety in his offer. "Separate quarters," she said firmly. "A door with a lock." "Of course. You'll have the guest room. It's small, but it's yours. And if Mr. Blackwood makes trouble—" Hartford's jaw tightened. "Then he'll have to go through me first, and that's not a fight he wants to pick." Kate took a deep breath, weighing her options. She could refuse, could try to make it on her own in Wilcox. But she had perhaps $3 to her name, no prospects, and a powerful enemy who had already demonstrated his willingness to destroy her. Or she could accept this stranger's offer, risk trusting a man she did not know in a place where she had no allies. But sometimes trust was a luxury you could not afford to withhold. "I accept your terms, Mr. Hartford." He nodded, replacing his hat. "Sam, if we're going to be working together, might as well skip the formalities." "Then you should call me Kate." They shook hands, sealing the agreement. Sam's grip was firm, but not crushing, the handshake of equals rather than master and servant. "We should get the legalities settled," Sam said. "Judge Cross will want to draw up a proper contract, make sure everything's above board." They walked together to the modest courthouse at the end of Main Street, Joshua running ahead to open the door. Inside the building was dim and cool, offering relief from the relentless sun. The judge's office was on the second floor, a cluttered space filled with law books and papers. Judge Benjamin Cross was a man in his early 60s, with a shock of white hair and shrewd blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked up from his desk as they entered, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Sam Hartford, didn't expect to see you in town today. Thought you'd be busy with the fall gather." "Change of plans, Ben. Need you to draw up an employment contract." The judge's gaze shifted to Kate, assessment replacing surprise. "This wouldn't have anything to do with that disgraceful spectacle in the town square, would it?" "It would. Emmett Blackwood's going to be furious." "Let him be." Judge Cross leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "Mrs. Sullivan, I knew your aunt. Grace Bennett was a fine woman, one of the few in this town who had the spine to stand up to Blackwood when he got too big for his britches. She'd be proud to see you doing the same." Kate felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes. You knew her well. Well enough to know she didn't owe Blackwood a red cent. That bank debt he's claiming pure fabrication. Grace owned her property free and clear, and she kept meticulous records that conveniently disappeared right after her death. Can you prove it? Sam asked. The judge shook his head. Not without those records. And Blackwood controls the sheriff, so there won't be any investigation into how Grace really died. Kate's hands clenched in her lap. You think it wasn't an accident? I think Grace Bennett was a careful woman who had lived in that cabin for 20 years without incident. I think it's mighty convenient that she died just when Blackwood was pressuring her to sell. And I think her niece showing up to claim her inheritance made certain powerful people very nervous. The room fell silent. Kate felt the weight of implications settling over her like a shroud. All the more reason to get this contract written up proper, Sam said quietly. So there's no question about Kate's status or my responsibility for her welfare. Judge Cross pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Terms. Sam outlined the agreement, the judge nodding and making notes. When the contract was complete, they each signed it with Joshua serving as witness despite his young age. There, Judge Cross said, sprinkling sand over the wet ink to dry it. All legal and proper. Mrs. Sullivan is now officially employed by Samuel Hartford for a period of 6 months with option to extend or terminate by mutual agreement. He handed Kate a copy of the contract, his expression serious. Keep this safe, Mrs. Sullivan. In this territory, a written agreement is worth more than gold. And watch yourself. Blackwood doesn't take kindly to people who defy him. They left the courthouse as the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The streets of Wilcox were quieter now, most folks taking shelter from the heat. Sam untied his mare from the hitching post. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. You up for it? Kate looked down at her traveling dress, already dusty and worn from weeks of journeying. I don't suppose I have much choice. Sam lifted Joshua onto the mare's back, then turned to Kate. You ever ridden before? In Central Park. Very sedately with a proper side saddle. Well, this ain't Central Park, but Copper here's gentle as a lamb. You'll ride with Josh if that's all right. I'll walk alongside. Kate accepted Sam's help, mounting the horse, settling herself behind Joshua, and gripping the saddle horn with both hands. The ground seemed very far away. Don't worry, Miss Kate, Joshua said over his shoulder. Copper never bucks. Uncle Sam says she's too lazy. That's comforting, Kate murmured. They set out north, leaving the dusty streets of Wilcox behind. The terrain was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, saguaro cacti standing sentinel across the desert floor, the Dragoon Mountains rising purple and majestic in the distance. The air smelled of creosote and sun-baked earth. Joshua chattered as they rode, pointing out landmarks and sharing details of ranch life with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of childhood. Sam walked alongside occasionally, adding a word or two, but mostly letting the boy talk. That's where Uncle Sam shot a rattlesnake that was going to bite old Pete, Joshua said, pointing at a cluster of rocks. And over there's where I found a horned toad. Uncle Sam let me keep him for 2 whole days before we had to let him go. Kate found herself relaxing despite her exhaustion and uncertainty. There was something soothing about the boy's innocent prattle, about the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the vast openness of the land around them. How long have you lived with your uncle? She asked Joshua. The boy's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. 2 years. Since my ma and pa died. Cholera got them both same week. Uncle Sam came and got me from the orphanage in Tucson. Kate's heart constricted. I'm sorry, Joshua. That must have been very hard. It was. But Uncle Sam's good to me. He's teaching me to rope and ride and everything. Says someday the ranch will be mine. Sam's hand came up to rest briefly on his nephew's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and love. Kate saw the pain in his eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable. What about your own family, Mr. Sam? Kate asked. Sam's expression closed off, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Had a wife, daughter too. Diphtheria took them both 3 years back. Emma, my little girl, she was just 4 years old. The words were spoken flatly, but Kate heard the universe of grief contained in them. She understood then why Sam had been willing to help her, a stranger in need. He knew what it meant to lose everything, to have the foundation of your world ripped away and have to somehow keep breathing, keep moving forward. "I'm so sorry," Kate said quietly. Sam nodded, but said nothing more. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft thud of Copper's hooves and the cry of a hawk somewhere overhead. As they crested a low rise, the Diamond H Ranch came into view. It was not a grand establishment, nothing like the sprawling cattle empires Kate had read about in dime novels, but it had a solid, honest look to it. A 2-story ranch house built of stone and timber, weathered but well-maintained. Several outbuildings of barn corrals where horses stood dozing in the afternoon heat. 5 men were working around the property, mending fences and tending to stock. They looked up as Sam and his companions approached, curiosity evident on their sun-darkened faces. "Boys," Sam called out, "this is Mrs. Sullivan. She'll be helping run the household from now on. I expect you to treat her with respect." An older man, perhaps 60, with a face like tanned leather and shrewd blue eyes, stepped forward. "Name's Pete Hawkins, ma'am. Been working for Sam here going on 8 years. You need anything, you just holler." The other ranch hands introduced themselves in turn, their manner polite, if somewhat reserved. Kate understood their caution. She was an unknown quantity, a woman from the East who might not last a week in this harsh country. Sam helped her down from Copper's back, then led the way to the ranch house. The interior was clean, but spare, clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional, rather than decorative, the floors swept but dusty. On the mantelpiece above the stone fireplace sat a photograph in a simple frame, but it had been turned face down. Kate did not need to ask whose image it held. "Your room's upstairs," Sam said, leading the way. "I apologize for the dust. Haven't had much time for housekeeping." The room he showed her was small, but adequate, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern range. The door had a sturdy lock, as promised. "Supper's usually around 6, Sam continued. "Josh and I have been making do with beans and bacon mostly, but if you're willing to cook, there's provisions in the larder." Kate set down her carpetbag and turned to face her new employer. "Sam, I need you to understand something. I'm grateful for what you've done, more grateful than I can properly express. But I won't be a charity case. I'll earn my keep and then some." "Never thought otherwise, Kate. And when the 6 months are up, if I've proven myself, I want to renegotiate for fair wages." A slight smile crossed Sam's weathered face. "Deal." They shook hands again, and Kate felt the first stirring of something she had not felt in months. Hope. Small and fragile, but hope nonetheless. That evening Kate cooked her first meal in the ranch house kitchen. She found flour and lard, some dried apples, basic spices. Nothing fancy, but she could work with it. She made biscuits and fried salt pork, stewed the dried apples with cinnamon and a touch of sugar. When she called Sam and Joshua to supper, the boys' eyes widened at the spread on the rough-hewn table. "Real food," Joshua exclaimed. "Uncle Sam, she made real food." Sam's lips quirked. "What have we been eating, Josh?" "Rocks and leather, mostly," the boy said solemnly, making Kate laugh despite herself. They sat down to eat, the 3 of them at the table in the gathering dusk. Joshua chattered away, but Sam was quiet, his expression thoughtful. Kate caught him watching her several times, his gray eyes unreadable. After the meal, Joshua helped clear the table with surprising diligence, then hugged his uncle good night before running upstairs to his room. Kate began washing the dishes in a basin of heated water. Sam appeared at her elbow with a towel to dry. "You don't have to help," Kate said. "I can manage." "Never said you couldn't, but many hands make light work, my mother used to say." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Sam spoke again, his voice quiet. "Thank you for what you did today. For Joshua, I mean. He hasn't been that animated since, well, in a long time. He's a good boy. You've done well with him. I do my best. But he needs more than I can give him. Needs a woman's influence, someone who can teach him the things I can't." Kate rinsed the last plate. "I'll do what I can. But Sam, you should know I've never been a mother. I don't know if I'll be any good at this." None of us know if we'll be any good at anything until we try. Later, as Kate prepared for bed in her small room, she stood at the window looking out over the darkened range. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, more stars than she had ever seen in Boston, where city lights dimmed the heavens. She thought about the strange path that had brought her here, the deaths and losses, the humiliation and fear. And now this unexpected sanctuary offered by a grieving widower who asked for nothing more than honest work in return. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but perhaps she thought as sleep began to claim her, it was the life she needed. Downstairs, Sam Hartford stood on his porch, smoking a final cigarette before bed. He thought about the woman now sleeping under his roof, about the courage it had taken for her to stand on that auction block without breaking. He had not planned to bid, had not even planned to attend the spectacle, but something had drawn him there, some instinct he could not name. And when he had seen her standing alone, defiant in the face of public scorn, he had known he could not walk away. There was danger in this, he knew. Emmett Blackwood was not a man to cross lightly, and by bringing Kate Sullivan under his protection, Sam had declared himself an enemy to one of the most powerful men in the territory. But Sam had faced danger before, had faced loss and grief and the kind of darkness that made a man question whether he wanted to keep breathing. He had survived all of it, had built something solid and real from the ashes of his old life. And if that life now included a Boston widow with fierce eyes and an unbreakable spine, well, stranger things had happened in the Arizona territory. Sam flicked his cigarette into the darkness and went inside to bed, unaware that in the shadows beyond his property line, a rider sat watching the ranch house, taking note of the lit windows and the new presence within. Emmett Blackwood did not forgive defiance, and he always collected his debts. In the morning, Kate woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the unfamiliar smells of a working ranch. She dressed quickly in her simplest gown and made her way downstairs, where she found Joshua already at the table, swinging his legs and looking hopeful. "Are you going to make breakfast? Miss Kate, Uncle Sam usually just gives me hardtack and jerky." Kate looked around the kitchen, assessing her resources. "I'll see what I can do." She found eggs in the larder, fresh enough, and some bacon that looked decent. There was coffee to be made and yesterday's biscuits to warm. Not a feast, but better than hardtack. As she worked, Sam came in from morning chores, his shirt already damp with sweat despite the early hour. "Smells good?" he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot Kate had set on the stove. "It's just eggs and bacon. That's more than Josh and I usually manage." They ate together as the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Kate felt the strangeness of the situation, sitting here with this man and boy she barely knew, participating in the simple ritual of a family breakfast. After the meal, Sam pushed back from the table. "I need to ride fence line today. Check for breaks. Josh will be working with Pete and the other hands. You'll have the house to yourself mostly." Kate nodded. "I'll start by giving the place a proper cleaning, and I'll inventory the larder, see what supplies we need." "Make a list. I'll ride into town tomorrow to stock up." After Sam and Joshua had left, Kate rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She swept floors and beat rugs, scrubbed surfaces that had not seen a woman's attention in 3 years. She found evidence of Sam's grief everywhere. The photograph still face down on the mantelpiece, a small dress folded carefully in a trunk, a woman's hairbrush in a drawer untouched but not discarded. Kate did not disturb these things. She understood the need to hold on to fragments of lost love, even when they cut like glass. By noon, the house gleamed. Kate had inventoried the larder and made a comprehensive list of needed supplies. She had also found in a small desk in what must have been Sarah Hartford's sitting room a collection of letters and papers. One letter caught her eye. It was addressed to Grace Bennett in a hand Kate did not recognize, dated just 2 weeks before her aunt's death. "Dear Grace," it read, "I must urge you once again to reconsider Mr. Blackwood's offer. The sum he proposes is generous, more than fair. I know you have your reasons for refusing, but please think of your niece. This property could provide for her future. Yours in fellowship, Reverend Thomas Wade." Kate's hands trembled as she held the letter. So the Reverend had been in on it too, pressuring her aunt to sell. And her aunt had refused, had held out against Blackwood's offers and the pressure of the church. What had Grace known that made the land so valuable? It was just a few acres with an old cabin or so, Kate had been told. But men did not pressure and scheme and possibly murder over worthless property. Kate needed to see that cabin, needed to understand what her aunt had died protecting. She was still holding the letter when she heard horses approaching the ranch. Moving to the window, she saw 3 riders, and her blood ran cold. Emmett Blackwood sat astride a magnificent black stallion, flanked by 2 men Kate did not recognize. Hard men with guns worn low and eyes that had seen violence. Kate's first instinct was to hide, to run. But she had nowhere to go, and running would solve nothing. Instead, she straightened her spine, smoothed her skirts, and went to the door. She opened it before Blackwood could knock, standing in the doorway with what she hoped was an expression of cool indifference. "Mr. Blackwood, this is a surprise." Blackwood's smile was all charm and no warmth. "Mrs. Sullivan, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to call and see how you were settling into your new circumstances. How kind of you to be concerned." "May I come in? I believe we have matters to discuss." Every instinct screamed at Kate to refuse. But she was alone, and these men were armed, and making an enemy of Blackwood would serve no purpose. "Of course, though I'm afraid I can't offer you much in the way of hospitality. I'm still learning where everything is kept." She stepped back, allowing Blackwood to enter. His 2 companions remained outside, hands resting casually near their guns. Blackwood removed his hat, looking around the now spotless kitchen with apparent approval. "You've already made your mark, I see. The Hartford house hasn't been this clean since Sarah died." The casual mention of Sam's dead wife made Kate's skin crawl. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwood?" "Direct. I appreciate that." He pulled out a chair and sat without being invited. "I wanted to discuss your aunt's property. The deed, the land, the shop in town, all of it." "I thought you claimed my aunt owed you money." "She did, $800 plus interest. But I'm a reasonable man, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm willing to forgive that debt entirely in exchange for a simple transfer of the property deed." Kate forced herself to remain calm. "And if I refuse?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "Then the debt stands, and without the means to pay it, you'll lose the property anyway. I'm offering you a way out. Take it." "I'll need to think about it." "There's nothing to think about. You're here because you have nothing, because you're dependent on Sam Hartford's charity. How long do you think that will last? How long before he tires of supporting a stranger?" Kate's jaw tightened. "Sam Hartford is an honorable man." "Sam Hartford is a fool who can't let go of his dead wife. You're not her, Mrs. Sullivan. You're a replacement, a substitute. And when he realizes that you'll be back where you started with nothing and nowhere to go." The words struck deeper than Kate wanted to admit, but she had learned in Boston how to hide pain behind a pleasant expression. "Nevertheless, I need time to consider your offer." Blackwood stood, replacing his hat. "You have until the end of the week. After that, I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And Mrs. Sullivan, be careful. This is dangerous country. Accidents happen. Just ask your aunt." The threat was unmistakable. Kate stood frozen as Blackwood and his men mounted their horses and rode away. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, breathing deeply. She needed to tell Sam what had happened. But more than that, she needed to understand what was really going on. Why was this land so important? What had her aunt known? Kate returned to the desk where she had found the letter. She searched more carefully now, looking for anything that might provide answers. In a hidden compartment at the back of a drawer, she found what she was looking for. A map hand drawn in her aunt's careful script. It showed the property north of town, the cabin, and the surrounding terrain. But what caught Kate's attention was a small X marked on the map with words written beside it in cramped letters. "Main vein. Tell no one." Kate's heart raced. A vein. Mining term. Her aunt had found something on that land, something valuable enough to kill for. She had to see that cabin, had to find out what was really there. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened and Kate began preparing supper, she heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Sam rode into the yard, his face grim. He dismounted and strode to the house with purpose. Kate met him at the door. "What's wrong?" "Someone cut my fence line. 20 head of cattle wandered onto Blackwood's range. He's claiming them as his own, says they're payment for the damage they did to his grazing land." Kate felt sick. "Sam, I'm so sorry. This is because of me. This is because of Blackwood. He's done this before to other people who got in his way. This is what he does." "What are we going to do?" Sam's jaw set in a hard line. "We're going to fight. But we need to be smart about it. We need evidence proof of what he's doing." Kate pulled the map from her pocket. "Then maybe we should start by finding out what my aunt was protecting." Sam Hartford stood in the lamplight of his kitchen, studying the map Kate had found with an intensity that made the muscles in his jaw work. Outside, the desert night had fallen complete and absolute, the kind of darkness that existed only far from the cities of the East. Joshua had been sent to bed an hour ago, his protests fading as exhaustion from a day's hard work claimed him. Kate watched Sam's face, trying to read the thoughts behind those gray eyes. She had learned in her brief time at the Diamond H that Sam was a man who kept his cards close, who thought before he spoke, and measured his words with care. "Your aunt was a smart woman," Sam said, finally setting the map on the table. "Smart enough to know that if Blackwood wanted this land, there had to be a reason beyond sentiment. The map shows a vein. That means mining. Doesn't it gold or silver?" "Could be. This whole territory's riddled with mineral deposits. Some pan out, most don't. But if Grace found something significant, that would explain why Blackwood's been so persistent." Kate leaned over the table, studying the crude drawing. "We need to go there, see what's actually on that land." "We will. But not tonight, and not alone. Blackwood's already shown he's willing to play rough. He cut my fence knowing exactly what would happen. That's a warning." "A warning of what?" Sam's eyes met hers, and Kate saw something in them that made her breath catch. Not fear exactly, but a grim understanding of what lay ahead. That he'll escalate. Next time it won't be cattle. It'll be something that can't be replaced. The weight of his words settled over the kitchen like a physical presence. Kate thought of Blackwood's visit that afternoon, his casual threats, the hard-eyed men who had accompanied him. "Maybe I should just give him what he wants," she said quietly. "Sign over the deed. It's not worth your cattle, Sam. It's not worth the danger." "No." Sam's voice was firm. "You start giving ground to men like Blackwood, they just keep taking. Trust me, I've seen it before. He won't stop with the land. He'll want the shop too, and anything else Grace left behind. Men like him don't know when to quit." "Then what do we do?" Sam folded the map carefully. "We get proof. We document what's on that land, and we make sure the right people know about it. Judge Cross may be the territorial marshal. Put enough eyes on this situation that Blackwood can't make you disappear like he did your aunt." The casual mention of murder made Kate's skin prickle with goosebumps. "You really think he killed her?" "I think Grace was healthy and careful, and she died right when it was most convenient for Blackwood to have her out of the way. I think that fire that destroyed her bank records was mighty suspicious. And I think you showing up to claim your inheritance scared him enough to try running you out of town." Kate wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the evening. "I'm putting you in danger just by being here." Sam's expression softened slightly. "Kate, I bought into this fight when I bid on you in that square. I knew what I was doing. Blackwood and I have history. This was always going to come to a head sooner or later." "What kind of history?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming absently on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "When I first bought this ranch 5 years ago, I was raw from losing Sarah and Emma. Wasn't thinking straight, wasn't paying attention to the kind of sharks that circle when they smell blood in the water. Blackwood offered to help me get established, loaned me money for stock and equipment. Said it was just neighborly. But it wasn't. No, the terms were predatory. Interest rates that would have bankrupted me in 2 years. But I was too grief-stricken to see it. By the time I realized what I'd signed, I was already in deep. Kate sat down across from him. How did you get out? Worked myself half to death. Hired out as a ranch hand on my own land to save money. Sold off everything that wasn't nailed down. And I got lucky. Cattle prices were good that year, and I had a strong calf crop. Paid Blackwood off in full with interest. He must have hated that. Sam's smile was without humor. He's hated me ever since. Tried to buy me out half a dozen times, always offering about half what the place is worth. When I wouldn't sell, he tried other methods. Cutting fences, spooking cattle during drives, convincing hands to quit right before roundup. Nothing I could prove, but I knew. And you stayed anyway? This is my land, my home. I'm not giving it up because some greedy son of a gun wants to expand his empire. Sam's voice was quiet, but carried an edge of steel. And I'm sure as hell not letting him bully a woman who's got no one else to stand for her. Kate felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the lamp or the lingering heat of the day. Sam Hartford was a hard man, weathered by grief and frontier life, but underneath that armor was a core of decency that seemed almost quaint in its simplicity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I know I've already said it, but I need you to know I mean it. You don't need to keep thanking me, Kate. Just do the work you promised to do and we're square." But they both knew it had already become more than a simple employment arrangement. The moment Sam had stood between Kate and Blackwood's designs, it had become something else entirely. A partnership, an alliance, maybe even the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. The next morning broke clear and hot, the sun climbing over the Dragoon Mountains with relentless intensity. Kate woke early, as had become her habit, and found Sam already gone to check the damaged fence line. Joshua sat at the kitchen table, trying to tie his boots with the focused concentration of a child who had not quite mastered the task. "Uncle Sam says we're going into town today," Joshua announced as Kate entered. "He says you need supplies for the kitchen." "That's right. Would you like to come along?" The boy's face lit up. "Can I? Uncle Sam usually makes me stay with Pete when he goes to town. Says I get into too much trouble." Kate smiled. "I'm sure you're not that much trouble, and I could use an assistant to help carry packages." They made breakfast together, Joshua chattering away about the ranch, the horses, the time he'd seen a rattlesnake as big around as his arm. Kate listened with half her attention, the other half planning what she would need from the general store. When Sam returned, his shirt dark with sweat, despite the early hour, he found Kate and Joshua laughing over some joke the boy had told. He stopped in the doorway, arrested by the scene. It looked so normal, so domestic, so much like the life he'd had before disease had stolen everything. The pang of grief that followed was expected. What surprised Sam was the smaller emotion that came after it. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. He had no right to feel pleased by this tableau, had no right to the warmth that spread through his chest at the sound of Kate's laughter. "Ready to head to town?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Kate looked up, her smile fading slightly at his tone. "Whenever you are. I've made a list of what we need." They rode into Wilcox in Sam's wagon, Joshua wedged between the two adults and bouncing with excitement. The town looked different to Kate now, less hostile than it had during the auction. Or perhaps it was just that she felt different, armed with purpose, and backed by a man who wasn't afraid of Emmett Blackwood. The general store was run by a stout woman named Martha Green, who greeted Sam with genuine warmth and Kate with cautious curiosity. "Heard you took on a housekeeper, Sam," Martha said as she began filling Kate's order. "Brave woman to take on the Hartford household." "The house wasn't that bad," Sam protested. Martha snorted. "Sam Hartford, I've seen bachelor housing, and yours was about as welcoming as a coyote den. This young lady has her work cut out for her." Kate found herself smiling despite the strangeness of being discussed, as if she weren't standing right there. "It's not so bad. Just needed a woman's touch." "Well, you've certainly made an impression already. Whole town's talking about how Sam bid $500 for you at that disgraceful auction." The reminder of that humiliation made Kate's cheeks burn, but Martha continued without seeming to notice. "About time someone stood up to Emmett Blackwood and his schemes. That man's gotten too big for his britches, if you ask me. Thinks he runs this whole territory." "Martha," Sam said quietly with a glance toward the door. "Careful." The shopkeeper waved a dismissive hand. "I'm too old and too ornery to worry about what Emmett Blackwood thinks. Besides, he needs my store as much as anyone else in this town. What's he going to do shop in Tucson?" As Martha wrapped purchases and tallied costs, Kate noticed Joshua had wandered toward the back of the store where a display of penny candy beckoned. Sam followed her gaze and smiled slightly. "Josh, you can pick one piece, just one." The boy's whoop of joy made several customers turn and smile. Kate felt that same strange warmth in her chest watching Sam with his nephew. The stern rancher facade cracked when Joshua was around, revealing glimpses of the man underneath. They were loading the wagon when Sheriff Marcus Cole approached his weathered face grave. He was a man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and the cautious eyes of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous political waters. "Sam, Mrs. Sullivan." He tipped his hat to Kate. "Might I have a word?" Sam's expression grew guarded. "Sheriff, I heard about your fence line getting cut, about the cattle Blackwood's claiming. Just wanted you to know that I looked into it. Sent my deputy out to examine the fence. And cut clean with wire cutters. No animal did that damage. But without witnesses, there's not much I can do. Blackwood's claiming your cattle damaged his property, and legally he's within his rights to hold them as compensation." Sam's jaw tightened. "Those cattle are worth $200 at least. My fence getting cut cost me maybe $10 in wire and labor. I know it, you know it, but unless you can prove Blackwood's men cut that fence, my hands are tied." Kate could see Sam struggling to control his temper. "Whose side are you on, Marcus?" The sheriff's face flushed. "I'm on the side of the law, Sam. You know that. But Blackwood's got influence, and he's got lawyers, and he's got the ear of the territorial governor. You want justice, you're going to need more than accusations." "Then what do you suggest?" Sheriff Cole glanced around, lowering his voice. "I suggest you be very careful. Document everything. Keep records. And maybe consider that some fights aren't worth the cost." With that cryptic advice, the sheriff tipped his hat again and walked away, leaving Sam staring after him with barely suppressed anger. "He's afraid," Kate said quietly. "He's bought," Sam corrected. "Blackwood probably has something on him. That's how he operates. Finds your weakness and exploits it." They finished loading the wagon in tense silence. As they prepared to leave town, Kate noticed Reverend Wade watching them from the steps of the church. The Reverend's expression was troubled, and when Kate met his eyes, he looked away quickly. On the ride back to the ranch, Joshua dozed between them, lulled by the wagon's rocking motion and the day's excitement. Kate found herself studying Sam's profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with easy competence. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly, not wanting to wake Joshua. "Go ahead." "Why did you really bid on me at that auction? The truth, not the practical reasons you gave Judge Cross." Sam was silent for so long Kate thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "I told you I lost my wife and daughter 3 years back. What I didn't tell you is how I spent the year after. I worked from sunup to sundown trying to exhaust myself so I wouldn't have to think, wouldn't have to feel. Got so bad that one night I rode out into the desert with my pistol, figured I'd just end it. Couldn't see a reason to keep going." Kate's breath caught. "Sam, I didn't do it, obviously. Sat there for hours, gun in my hand, trying to work up the nerve. Then I heard a sound. Coyote pup couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, caught in some brush and crying for its mother. I got down off my horse and freed it. Watched it run off into the darkness." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Stupidest thing. But that little pup reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's still life worth saving. Still things worth fighting for, even if they're not your own fights." Kate felt tears prick at her eyes. "So you saved me because of a coyote pup?" A ghost of a smile crossed Sam's face. "I saved you because you reminded me what real courage looks like. Standing on that platform with your head high, refusing to break even when everyone was against you. That's the kind of strength that's worth protecting. They rode in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Kate realized she was seeing a different Sam Hartford than the taciturn rancher who had first offered her employment. This man carried depths of pain and resilience she was only beginning to understand. When they reached the ranch, old Pete was waiting by the barn, his expression grim. "Boss, we got trouble." Sam handed the reins to Kate and jumped down from the wagon. "What kind of trouble?" "Barn fire. Started about an hour ago. We got it out, but not before it took most of the hay we had stored for winter. And boss," Pete's voice dropped, "it weren't no accident. Found oil-soaked rags near where it started." Sam's face went white, then flushed with rage. "Anyone hurt?" "No, sir. We were all out on the range when it started. Young Tommy saw the smoke and raised the alarm. We got lucky." But it wasn't luck, and they all knew it. This was Blackwood's next move, escalating from cutting fences to outright arson. Kate climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaking. "Sam, this is because of me. He's attacking you because you're protecting me." Sam whirled on her, and for a moment Kate saw the full force of the anger burning in him, but when he spoke his voice was controlled. "This is because Emmett Blackwood is a snake who's gotten away with too much for too long. Don't you dare blame yourself for his crimes. But if I just gave him what he wants, then he wins, and the next person who stands up to him will suffer the same fate. Is that what you want? To teach him that violence and intimidation work?" Kate shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Sam's expression softened slightly. "I need to check the damage. Pete, get the men together. I want a watch set round the clock. Nobody gets near this ranch without us knowing about it." As Pete hurried off to organize the hands, Sam turned back to Kate. "Take Josh inside. Make sure he's all right. This had to have scared him." Kate looked around and realized Joshua had disappeared. She found him in the house, curled up on his bed with his face pressed against the pillow. He wasn't crying, but his whole body was rigid with tension. "Joshua." Kate sat on the edge of the bed, her hand hovering over his small back before she gathered the courage to touch him. "Are you all right? Is Uncle Sam going to die?" The boy's voice was muffled by the pillow. "Like Ma and Pa, like Aunt Sarah and Emma." Kate's heart broke. She had been so focused on her own problems, on the danger Blackwood represented, that she hadn't fully considered how this must look to a child who had already lost so much. "No, sweetheart. Your uncle is very strong and very smart. He's going to be fine." Joshua rolled over, his face blotchy and his eyes red. "That's what they said about my pa, too. And then he wasn't fine. He died and left me alone." Kate pulled the boy into her arms, holding him as he finally let the tears come. She made soothing sounds, rocking him gently, the way she imagined a mother might, though she had no experience to draw on. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "I'm scared too, but your uncle has protected this ranch through droughts and hard winters and all sorts of challenges. He knows how to take care of himself and the people he loves. He loves me, doesn't he?" Joshua's voice was small and uncertain. "Of course he does. Anyone can see that." "Do you think—" The boy hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Do you think you might stay? Even after the 6 months I like having you here? It feels like having a family again." Kate had to swallow hard before she could answer. "I like being here too, Joshua. Very much." She stayed with him until he fell asleep, exhausted by fear and tears. Then she made her way downstairs and began preparing supper, needing the familiar rhythms of work to steady her nerves. Sam came in as the sun was setting, his face and hands black with soot. He washed at the pump outside before entering the kitchen, but the smell of smoke still clung to him. "How bad?" Kate asked, not sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Bad enough. We lost about 2/3 of our winter hay. I'll have to buy more, which means less money for everything else. And we're going to have to post guards, which means less work getting done during the day because the men will be tired from night watch." "I'm so sorry, Sam." He shook his head, sitting heavily at the table. "Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Blackwood did this, not you." Kate set a plate in front of him, the simple meal she'd prepared from the day's purchases. "Joshua asked me if you were going to die." Sam's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What did you tell him? That you were strong and smart and knew how to take care of the people you love." "And he believed you?" "I think so. Eventually. He's scared, Sam. He's lost so many people already." Sam set down his fork, his appetite apparently gone. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by him, keeping him here. Maybe he'd be better off in Tucson in a real home with a real family." "You are his real family. And this is his home. Don't let Blackwood take that away too." They ate in silence, both too tired and worried for conversation. After the meal, Kate cleaned up while Sam went to check on Joshua. She heard his boots on the stairs, the creak of the boy's door opening then closing again softly. When Sam came back down, he looked older than his 35 years, worn down by responsibility and fear. "I need to end this," he said quietly. "Need to find a way to stop Blackwood before someone gets killed. Then we go to that cabin. Tomorrow. We find out what's on that land and we get proof." Sam nodded slowly. "All right, but we're taking Pete and a couple of the other hands. I'm not riding into possible danger with just the two of us." That night, Kate lay awake in her small room listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She could hear the guards making their rounds, the soft nicker of horses in the barn, the distant howl of coyotes in the hills. She thought about Joshua's question. Would she stay after the 6 months were up? A week ago, she would have said she didn't know, that it depended on circumstances and opportunities. But now, lying in the darkness of the Diamond H Ranch, she realized she didn't want to leave. It wasn't just about the safety Sam offered or the work that gave her purpose. It was about belonging to something again, about being part of a small family that needed her as much as she needed them. And it was about Sam himself. Though Kate was reluctant to examine those feelings too closely, she barely knew the man. And yet there was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of right and wrong, that called to something deep inside her. She heard footsteps in the hall and tensed, then relaxed as she recognized Sam's distinctive tread. He paused outside her door for a moment, and Kate held her breath, wondering if he would knock. But after a few seconds, the footsteps moved on, and she heard his door open and close. Kate exhaled slowly, surprised by the mixture of relief and disappointment she felt. Then she turned over and forced herself to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring its own challenges. They set out for Grace's cabin at first light, a party of 5. Sam and Kate rode together on his roan gelding, with Kate seated behind him, her arms around his waist for balance. Old Pete followed on his ancient mule along with 2 younger hands named Tommy Briggs and Jack Chin. The ride north took them through increasingly rugged terrain, past stands of mesquite and prickly pear, across dry washes where water ran only during the summer monsoons. The cabin sat in a small valley sheltered by cottonwood trees and fed by a spring that created a ribbon of green in the otherwise arid landscape. It was a simple structure, 1 room with a stone chimney and a porch that looked out over the valley. But it was solidly built, meant to last, and surrounded by land that was surprisingly fertile for the desert. "This is what Blackwood wants?" Kate asked as they dismounted. "It doesn't look like much." "It's the water," Sam said, pointing to the spring. "This feeds Sweetwater Creek, which runs through Blackwood's land and half a dozen other ranches. Whoever controls this spring controls the water supply for the whole area." They approached the cabin carefully, Sam's hand resting on his pistol, but the place was clearly abandoned, the door hanging slightly ajar, dust coating every surface inside. Kate entered slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The interior was spare, but showed signs of regular use. A bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a small stove. Shelves lined one wall, holding canned goods and supplies. "Aunt Grace must have come here often," Kate murmured, running her finger along the dusty table. "It feels like her somehow." Sam was examining the floorboards, tapping them with the heel of his boot. "Looking for hollow spots. If Grace found something valuable, she might have hidden it." Pete and the hands were outside checking the perimeter and watching for any sign of Blackwood's men. Kate joined Sam in his search, moving methodically through the small space. It was Jack who found it a loose board near the stone fireplace. Underneath was a small cavity, and inside that cavity was a leather journal and a cloth bag that clinked when Kate lifted it. Sam opened the bag first. Inside were rock samples, rough chunks of stone shot through with silver veins that gleamed even in the cabin's dim light. "Silver," Sam breathed. "High grade, too, from the look of it. This is what Blackwood's after." Kate opened the journal with trembling hands. Grace's handwriting filled the pages, careful notations of dates and discoveries. March 12, 1883. Kate read aloud. "Found exposed vein near north property line. Initial samples suggest significant deposit. Must keep this secret until I can arrange proper claim and protection." She flipped through more pages, her aunt's excitement evident in the increasingly hurried script. April 3rd. Emmett came by again pressing me to sell. I refused as always. He's getting desperate, which makes me think he knows about the silver. Must be more careful. April 20th. Emmett proposed marriage. Can you imagine? After all these years of barely speaking to me, suddenly he declares his affection. I told him I'd rather marry a rattlesnake. He did not take it well. Kate's voice faltered. May 1st. I'm frightened. Emmett's threats are becoming more explicit. He says I'm a foolish old woman playing with fire. Perhaps I should write to Catherine, tell her about this place in case something happens. The journal entries stopped on May 15th, just 2 weeks before Grace's death. Kate read the final entry with a lump in her throat. I've decided to hold firm. This land is Catherine's inheritance, her future security. I won't let Emmett Blackwood steal it from her the way he's stolen from so many others. If anything happens to me, the truth is here in this cabin. Let it stand as testimony. Kate closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. He killed her. He killed her for this silver. Sam's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and solid. We don't know that for certain, but we have enough here to raise serious questions, enough to force an investigation. Will it be enough to stop him? It has to be. They gathered the journal and samples, carefully preparing to take them back to the ranch, but as they emerged from the cabin, Pete called out a warning. Riders coming, 6 of them. Sam swore under his breath. Get to the horses, now! But it was already too late. 6 mounted men emerged from the trees, blocking their path. At their head rode Jake Monroe, a hard-faced man in his 30s who wore his guns low and his reputation for violence like a badge. Well, well, Jake drawled. Sam Hartford and his bought woman. Mr. Blackwood figured you might come sniffing around here eventually. Sam stepped in front of Kate, his hand on his gun. This is private property, Monroe. You're trespassing. Funny, that's what Mr. Blackwood says about you. Says this cabin and the land it sits on belong to him, now payment for debts owed. That's a lie, and you know it. Jake shrugged. Don't matter what I know. Matters what Mr. Blackwood says, and he says you and your people need to leave. Now. And if we don't? Jake's hand moved to his gun. Then things get unpleasant. The tension stretched taut as a wire. Kate could feel Sam's muscles coiling, ready to draw. Old Pete and the hands had their hands on their weapons too, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Sam, Kate whispered, don't. It's not worth dying over. She saw his jaw clench, saw the war between pride and sense playing out across his face. Finally, he nodded slightly. We're leaving. But this isn't over, Monroe. Not by a long shot. Didn't figure it was. They mounted up Sam, helping Kate onto his horse with more force than necessary, his anger evident in every movement. As they rode away from the cabin, Kate clutched the journal to her chest, determined not to let Blackwood's men see what they'd found. They had made it perhaps half a mile when the shot rang out. Sam jerked in the saddle, and Kate felt something warm and wet spray across her hands. He slumped forward, and it was only Kate's arms around him that kept him from falling. Sam! Her scream cut through the desert air. Sam, no! Pete and the hands wheeled their horses around, guns drawn, but there was no second shot. Whoever had fired had melted back into the rocks. Get him back to the ranch, Pete ordered Tommy and Jack. Fast as you can. I'll cover your retreat." Kate held Sam upright as Tommy took the reins, urging the horse into a gallop. Blood was spreading across Sam's shirt, soaking through from a wound in his left shoulder. "Stay with me," Kate whispered fiercely in his ear. "Sam Hartford, you stay with me. You hear? You promised to protect me, and you can't do that if you die." Sam's eyes fluttered open, pain-glazed but aware. "Kate, the journal. Keep it safe." "I will. But you have to stay conscious. Focus on my voice. Stay with me." The ride back to the ranch was the longest hour of Kate's life. She talked continuously nonsense, mostly anything to keep Sam conscious and aware. She told him about Boston, about her childhood, about the first time she'd seen snow. Anything to keep him anchored to this world. By the time they reached the Diamond H, Sam had lapsed into unconsciousness. The ranch hands helped carry him inside, laying him on his bed as Kate shouted for someone to fetch Dr. Sullivan from town. She tore open Sam's shirt, revealing the wound. The bullet had entered just below his left shoulder, and she couldn't tell if it had gone through or was still lodged inside. Drawing on half-remembered lessons from her father's medical books, Kate did what she could. She cleaned the wound with whiskey-pressed clean cloths against it to slow the bleeding. Her hand shook, and she had to keep wiping tears from her eyes to see clearly. Joshua appeared in the doorway, his face white with terror. "Is Uncle Sam going to die?" Kate wanted to lie to offer comfort, but she'd learned that children could sense dishonesty. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm doing everything I can to make sure he doesn't." The boy came to stand beside her, his small hand gripping her arm. "He has to be okay. He has to." "I know." Dr. Sullivan arrived 2 hours later, his medical bag in hand and his expression grave. He examined Sam quickly, his experienced hands probing the wound. "Bullet's still in there. Missed the major vessels, thank God, but it needs to come out. Mrs. Sullivan, I'll need your help." The next hour was a nightmare. Kate held Sam down as the doctor probed for the bullet, using whiskey as the only anesthetic. Sam regained consciousness partway through the procedure. His scream of agony, something Kate knew would haunt her dreams. Finally, mercifully, Dr. Sullivan extracted the bullet, a misshapen piece of lead that he dropped into a tin bowl with a clink. "Clean wound now," the doctor said, binding Sam's shoulder with practiced efficiency. "Main concern is infection. He'll need round-the-clock care for the next few days. Fever's almost certain, so we'll need to keep it from getting too high." "I'll take care of him," Kate said firmly. Dr. Sullivan looked at her appraisingly. "You did good work, Mrs. Sullivan. Your father taught you well." After the doctor left, Kate set up a vigil beside Sam's bed. She bathed his forehead with cool water, changed his bandages, and made sure he drank when he was conscious enough to swallow. Joshua refused to leave, curling up in a chair beside the bed and watching his uncle with frightened eyes. As night fell, Sam's fever climbed. He thrashed in the bed, calling out names Kate didn't recognize, reliving battles from his past. Once he cried out for Sarah, his voice breaking on his dead wife's name. Kate held his hand through it all, speaking softly, trying to anchor him. "You're at home, Sam. You're safe. Joshua and I are here. We're not leaving." Near midnight, Sam's eyes opened clearer than they'd been in hours. He looked at Kate, really looked at her, and she saw recognition dawn. "Kate, you're still here." "Of course I'm still here. Where else would I be?" "Thought you'd have enough sense to leave. Get away from this mess." "Well, I've never been accused of having too much sense." She managed a weak smile. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot." "That's because you have been." Sam's hand tightened on hers. "Did you get the journal? The samples?" "Yes, they're safe." "Good. That's good." His eyes drifted closed again. "Kate." "Yes." "I'm glad you're here." Before Kate could respond, he had slipped back into feverish sleep, but those words, simple as they were, lodged in her heart like warmth on a cold night. The next 3 days passed in a blur of nursing and worry. Sam's fever spiked and fell again. Kate barely slept, afraid to leave his side for more than a few minutes at a time. Old Pete and the hands kept the ranch running, but the atmosphere was grim. Everyone knew this had been an attempt on Sam's life, and everyone knew who was behind it. On the fourth day, the fever finally broke. Sam woke lucid and weak, but clearly on the mend. He found Kate asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head pillowed on her arms on the edge of his mattress. He studied her face in the early morning light. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair escaping its pins. But she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness. There was strength in the line of her jaw, determination in the set of her mouth, even in sleep. Sam reached out with his good hand and gently touched her hair. The gesture woke her, and she sat up quickly, disoriented. "Sam, you're awake. How do you feel?" "Better. Weak as a kitten, but better." He paused. "You look terrible." Kate laughed, a sound close to tears. "Thank you. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear." "I mean, you look exhausted. You've been taking care of me." "Of course I have. What did you expect?" Sam didn't know how to answer that. He'd expected her to do her job, certainly. But this level of devotion, this tireless care, went beyond employment. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't need to thank me. You took a bullet trying to protect what's mine. It's the least I could do." Over the next week, as Sam slowly regained his strength, a new dynamic developed in the Hartford household. Kate nursed him through the day, helping him walk, when he was strong enough, changing his bandages with gentle efficiency. Joshua hovered nearby, clearly relieved that his uncle was recovering, but still fearful of a relapse. And in the quiet moments when Joshua was asleep and the ranch was still, Sam and Kate talked, really talked in a way neither had done with another person in years. Sam told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could read, about the war, though he didn't go into detail about what he'd seen and done, about meeting Sarah at a church social, how her laugh had caught his attention across a crowded room. Kate told him about Boston society, about the rigid rules and expectations that had governed her life, about her marriage to James Sullivan, which had started with hope and ended in disgrace, about the moment she'd realized her husband was not the man she'd thought he was. "Did you love him?" Sam asked one evening, the question surprising them both. Kate considered carefully. "I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of him more than the reality. He represented security status, a place in society. The actual man underneath all that, I'm not sure I ever really knew him." "That's a lonely way to live." "Yes, it was." Kate met his eyes. "What about you and Sarah?" Sam's expression grew distant. "I loved her. God, I loved her so much it hurt sometimes. She was everything good in my life. When I lost her and Emma, I lost my reason for being. But you kept going. Had to. For Josh, if nothing else. Kid needed someone, and I was all he had left." Kate reached out and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them during his illness. "You're a good man, Sam Hartford." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "Kate, I need to tell you something." "What?" But before he could continue, they heard a horse approaching at speed. Both tensed, Sam reaching for the gun he'd taken to keeping on his nightstand. Old Pete burst through the door, his face grim. "Boss, we got a problem. Sheriff's here with papers. Says Blackwood's pressing charges." Sam struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "What kind of charges?" "Trespassing. Says you broke into that cabin without permission. Says you stole property that belonged to him." Kate felt her blood run cold. "That's ridiculous. The cabin's on my land." "Maybe so, ma'am. But Blackwood's got a deed that says different. And without Grace's original deed to prove otherwise, we can't dispute it." Sam swore viciously. "Where's the sheriff now?" "Waiting outside. Says he's got to take you in, Sam. Says if you resist, he'll have to use force." Sam and Kate exchanged a long look. They both knew resisting would only make things worse. But the thought of Sam being hauled to jail while still recovering from a gunshot wound made Kate's blood boil. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "Kate, no." "Yes. If you're going to jail, I'm going too. We'll face this together." Sam's eyes softened. "All right. Together." And as they prepared to face Sheriff Cole and whatever trumped-up charges Emmett Blackwood had manufactured, Kate realized something that both terrified and exhilarated her. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, between the auction block and the bullet wound between the shared meals and the whispered conversations in the dark, she had fallen in love with Sam Hartford. She didn't know when it had happened exactly. Maybe it had been building from that first moment he'd stood up for her in the town square. Maybe it had solidified as she'd nursed him through fever and pain. Or maybe it had always been there waiting to be acknowledged. What she did know was that she would fight for this man, for this makeshift family, for this dusty ranch that had become more of a home than her Boston mansion had ever been. And if that fight meant going up against the most powerful man in the territory, then so be it. The battle for Grace's legacy, for Kate's future, and for something far more precious than silver was about to truly begin. The Wilcox Jail was a squat adobe building that baked in the Arizona sun like clay in a kiln. Its 2 cells were rarely occupied, the town being generally peaceful except when cowboys came in from the ranges with money burning holes in their pockets and whiskey burning their throats. Now one of those cells held Sam Hartford, his wounded shoulder freshly bandaged by Dr. Sullivan, his face set in lines of grim determination. Kate sat on a bench outside the sheriff's office, refusing to leave, despite Sheriff Cole's suggestion that she return to the ranch. Joshua huddled beside her, his small hand gripping hers with a fierceness that spoke of his terror at seeing another family member taken from him. "Mrs. Sullivan," Sheriff Cole said, for the 3rd time, his weathered face uncomfortable with the situation. "There's nothing you can do here. The hearing won't be until tomorrow at the earliest. Judge Cross has to review the charges." "Then I'll wait until tomorrow." Kate's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I'm not leaving him." The sheriff sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. He'd seen that same stubborn set to Grace Bennett's jaw, and he knew from experience that Bennett women didn't budge once they'd made up their minds. Inside the cell, Sam paced despite the pain in his shoulder. The charges were absurd, manufactured from whole cloth, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. Blackwood had the ear of the territorial judge, had money enough to hire lawyers who could twist facts into pretzels. And Sam's presence at the cabin, his possession of Grace's journal and the silver samples could be made to look like theft if presented the right way to the wrong people. He stopped pacing as footsteps approached the cell. Emmett Blackwood stood in the corridor, impeccably dressed as always, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Hartford, you're looking poorly. That shoulder wound troubling you." Sam's hands clenched into fists. "What do you want, Blackwood?" "Just paying a courtesy call. Wanted to see how you were settling into your accommodations." Blackwood's smile widened. "They're not much, I know. But then, you won't be here long. Just until the trial." "There won't be a trial. Judge Cross knows these charges are garbage." "Does he?" "I have documents proving I purchased that cabin and surrounding land from Grace Bennett 3 months before her death. I have witnesses who will testify to seeing you break into my property. And I have those silver samples you stole from my cabin in your possession. Seems fairly straightforward to me." Sam stepped closer to the bars. "You're a liar and a murderer. Grace never sold you anything. You killed her for that land, and we both know it." Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been pain, quickly masked. Grace Bennett was a stubborn woman who didn't know what was good for her. She could have sold that land for a fair price and lived comfortably. Instead, she chose to dig in her heels and fight. That was her mistake. "So you admit it. You had her killed." "I admit nothing. Grace fell from her cabin steps. A tragic accident. The territorial marshal investigated and found no evidence of foul play." "Because you paid him off just like you've paid off Cole." Blackwood leaned against the cell bars, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know what your real mistake was, Hartford, taking in that woman. If you'd let her twist in the wind, let her sign over the deed and disappear, none of this would have happened. Your ranch would be safe, your cattle wouldn't be seized, and you wouldn't be sitting in a jail cell facing charges that could see you in territorial prison for 5 years. I'd make the same choice again." Would you, even knowing it might cost you everything? Even knowing it might cost her everything? Blackwood straightened. Because that's what's going to happen, Hartford. You'll go to prison. Your ranch will be foreclosed on for debts, and Mrs. Sullivan will be right back where she started with nothing and no one. Except this time she won't even have the option of an auction. This time she'll just disappear into the desert and no one will ask questions. The threat was unmistakable. Sam's vision went red and he lunged at the bars, his good hand reaching through to grab Blackwood's collar. Pain exploded in his wounded shoulder, but he held on, dragging the banker closer. "You touch her!" Sam growled, his voice barely human. "And I will kill you. I don't care if I have to break out of hell itself to do it. You touch one hair on her head and you're a dead man." Blackwood's eyes widened briefly with genuine fear before he twisted free, stumbling backward. "That's assault, Hartford. Sheriff—" But Sheriff Cole had conveniently stepped outside, leaving the two men alone. Blackwood straightened his collar, his composure returning. "You just added to your charges, threatening a citizen assault. Judge Cross will hear about this. Judge Cross can go to hell, and you can lead the way." Blackwood smiled coldly. "Enjoy your stay, Hartford. I'll make sure Mrs. Sullivan knows you were thinking of her." He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Sam slumped against the cell wall, his shoulder throbbing and his mind racing. He had to get out of here. Had to protect Kate and Joshua, but the walls were solid adobe, the bars were iron, and he was locked in tight. Outside, Kate watched Blackwood emerge from the jail, his expression smug. Their eyes met, and he tipped his hat mockingly. "Mrs. Sullivan, lovely to see you again. I do hope you're comfortable at the Hartford place. Enjoy it while you can." Kate stood, her spine rigid. "This won't work, Mr. Blackwood. Whatever you're planning, it won't work." "Won't it? Your protector is in jail. Your claim to the land is disputed. And you have no allies in this town except a few ranch hands and an old woman who runs a boarding house. I'd say my position is considerably stronger than yours. You're forgetting something." "Oh, and what's that?" Kate stepped closer, her voice low and intense. "I'm a Bennett woman, and we don't give up. My aunt fought you until her last breath, and I'll do the same. You can steal land, you can buy judges and sheriffs, but you can't break us. We're stronger than you'll ever understand." For just a moment, Blackwood's mask slipped, and Kate saw something raw beneath it. Regret, perhaps, or rage at being defied yet again by a Bennett woman. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual cold amusement. "We'll see, Mrs. Sullivan, we'll see." That night Kate returned to the ranch with Joshua, both of them exhausted and frightened. Old Pete had organized the hands into a protective rotation, but everyone knew they were vulnerable without Sam's leadership. Kate put Joshua to bed, then sat at the kitchen table with Grace's journal open before her. She read every entry carefully, looking for anything that might help their case. But without the original deed, without proof that the land had belonged to Grace, the journal was just the ramblings of a dead woman. She was still reading when she heard a soft knock at the door. Her hand went to the rifle Sam had insisted she keep close, but when she opened the door, she found not an enemy, but an unexpected ally. Reverend Thomas Wade stood on the porch, his hat in his hands and his face troubled. "Mrs. Sullivan, I apologize for the late hour. Might I come in?" Kate hesitated, remembering the Reverend's involvement in the auction, his apparent allegiance to Blackwood. But something in his expression spoke of genuine distress. "All right. But I'm armed, Reverend, and I know how to use it." A ghost of a smile crossed the Reverend's face. "I wouldn't expect anything less from Grace Bennett's niece." He sat at the table and Kate poured coffee for them both, the simple ritual giving her time to study him. He looked older than she remembered, careworn and weary. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, "for the auction, for pressuring you to accept Blackwood's schemes, for failing to stand up when I should have." "Why didn't you stand up, I mean?" The Reverend's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Because I'm a coward. Because Blackwood knows things about my past things that could destroy my ministry here. and because I convinced myself that cooperating with him was the lesser evil. What changed? Sam Hartford getting shot. That bullet was meant to kill Mrs. Sullivan. Blackwood's escalating beyond intimidation and theft. He's willing to commit murder in broad daylight now, and I realized that if I stay silent, I'm complicit in whatever comes next. Kate leaned forward. Do you have proof, anything that could help Sam? The Reverend reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. This is Grace's original deed, the real one showing clear ownership of that cabin and land. She gave it to me for safekeeping 6 months ago when Blackwood's pressure was intensifying. Made me promise to give it to her heir if anything happened to her. Kate's hands trembled as she took the document. Why didn't you come forward before? Because I was afraid, and because I thought maybe Blackwood would be satisfied with the cabin, would leave the rest alone. But I see now he won't stop until he has everything, until everyone who stands against him is destroyed. This deed proves the land is mine, proves Blackwood's claims are false. It does more than that. Look at the date of purchase. Grace bought that land 23 years ago, long before Blackwood even came to Wilcox. Any deed he's producing showing a sale 3 months ago is an obvious forgery. Kate felt hope kindle in her chest for the first time in days. Will you testify to this? Tell Judge Cross what you know. The Reverend was quiet for a long moment. If I do, Blackwood will destroy me, will make public things I've spent years trying to atone for. And if you don't, he'll destroy Sam and me, and probably Joshua too, since he'll be in the way. Reverend Wade closed his eyes. I know. God help me, I know. When he opened them again, there was resolution in their depths. I'll testify. I'll tell Judge Cross everything. It's time I stopped being a coward and started being the man God called me to be. Kate reached across the table and gripped his hand. Thank you. You may have just saved all our lives. After the Reverend left, Kate sat staring at the deed, her mind racing. This changed everything. With proof of ownership, Blackwood's charges against Sam would collapse. But getting that proof to Judge Cross meant getting past Blackwood's allies, meant putting herself and potentially Joshua in danger. She was still pondering the problem when another knock came at the door. This time it was Mrs. Eleanor Price, the boarding house proprietress, accompanied by 3 other women Kate recognized from town. We heard about Sam, Mrs. Price said without preamble. Heard Blackwood's trying to railroad him into prison. We're here to help. Kate blinked in surprise. I don't understand. You're risking Blackwood's anger by coming here. Blackwood's anger be damned, said Martha Green from the general store. We've watched that man terrorize this town for too long. Grace Bennett was our friend and you're her blood. That makes you family, and we protect our own. The third woman, whom Kate didn't know, stepped forward. Name's Sarah Chen, Jack's mother. My boy says you're good people. Says Sam Hartford took a bullet protecting what's yours. That's worth standing up for. Mrs. Price set a basket on the table. We've brought food for you and Joshua, and we've been talking. Tomorrow's the hearing before Judge Cross. We're all planning to attend, show the judge that Blackwood doesn't speak for the whole town. Kate felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, dear. Just let us help. Mrs. Price patted her hand. Grace would have done the same for any of us. It's time we returned the favor. After the women left, Kate felt less alone than she had since arriving in Wilcox. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a community that had decided to fight back against tyranny. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Kate dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, pinned up her hair, and prepared to face whatever the day would bring. Joshua insisted on coming, and she didn't have the heart to refuse him. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Kate had expected a handful of spectators, but it seemed half the town had turned out. Mrs. Price and her allies sat in the front row, their faces set with determination. Ranch owners from neighboring spreads filled the back benches, men who had suffered under Blackwood's schemes and were ready to see him challenged. Sam was brought in wearing chains, his face pale but resolute. When his eyes found Kate's, something passed between them, a current of understanding, and shared purpose. Judge Benjamin Cross entered, his white hair seeming to glow in the morning light streaming through the windows. He surveyed the packed courtroom with shrewd eyes. "Well, this is quite a turnout for a simple property dispute. Mr. Blackwood, I assume you're prepared to present your case?" Blackwood stood confident and composed. "I am, Your Honor. The facts are simple. Samuel Hartford trespassed on property I legally purchased, assaulted my employees, and stole valuable mineral samples. I have documentation proving my ownership and witnesses to corroborate the theft." "And Mr. Hartford, how do you plead?" Sam's lawyer, a young man from Tucson whom Judge Cross had appointed, stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor. We dispute Mr. Blackwood's claim to the property and assert that my client was within his rights to protect Mrs. Catherine Sullivan's legal inheritance." "Then we'd better hear the evidence. Mr. Blackwood, proceed." What followed was a masterclass in legal manipulation. Blackwood produced documents showing a bill of sale dated 3 months before Grace's death, signed with what looked like Grace's signature. He presented testimony from a surveyor claiming to have witnessed the sale. He showed the silver samples as proof of theft. It was all lies, but it was convincing lies wrapped in official documents and sworn statements. Sam's lawyer did his best, but he was young and inexperienced, clearly outmatched by Blackwood's polished presentation. Kate felt despair settling over her. Even with the real deed, would it be enough against such carefully constructed falsehoods? Then Reverend Wade stood. "Your Honor, if I may, I have information pertinent to this case." Judge Cross looked surprised. "Reverend Wade, you're not listed as a witness." "No, Your Honor, but I have evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Blackwood's claims." Blackwood's face went white, then flushed with rage. "Your Honor, this is irregular." "So is half the testimony we've heard today," Judge Cross said dryly. "I'll allow it." Reverend approached the bench. The Reverend walked forward with the original deed in his hands. Kate held her breath as he presented it to the judge, as he explained how Grace had given it to him for safekeeping, as he testified to the date of purchase and the clear chain of ownership. "This document," Judge Cross said slowly, examining it with a magnifying glass, "appears to be genuine. The paper matches the age, the seal is authentic. Reverend, you're willing to swear under oath that Grace Bennett gave this to you?" "I am, Your Honor." "And you can explain why you didn't come forward when Mrs. Sullivan first arrived in Wilcox?" The Reverend's voice was steady despite the shame in his eyes. "Because I was afraid, Your Honor. Mr. Blackwood has certain information about my past information I feared would destroy my ability to serve this community. I let that fear override my duty to justice and to Grace Bennett's memory." Judge Cross leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Blackwood, would you care to explain how you could have purchased property from Grace Bennett 3 months before her death when she had already owned said property for 23 years? Blackwood's composure finally cracked. "That deed is a forgery. The Reverend is lying, probably in exchange for some consideration from Mrs. Sullivan." "I think not. I knew Grace Bennett knew her handwriting. This deed is genuine." Judge Cross's voice hardened. "Which means your bill of sale is the forgery. Which means these charges against Mr. Hartford are fraudulent. Which means, Mr. Blackwood, you are in serious legal jeopardy." The courtroom erupted in noise. Blackwood surged to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is a travesty, I demand." "You demand nothing." Judge Cross's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm dismissing all charges against Samuel Hartford. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into Grace Bennett's death and into your business practices. Sheriff Cole, you will cooperate fully with the territorial marshal on this matter." Sheriff Cole, who had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings, nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." Blackwood's eyes darted around the courtroom, seeing for the first time the hostile faces surrounding him. These people he'd terrorized, whose fear he'd counted on, were no longer afraid. The spell was broken. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not by a long shot." He strode from the courtroom, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. As he passed Kate, she met his eyes without flinching. She had won this round, but she knew Blackwood was right. It wasn't over. Sam was released from his chains, and Kate rushed to him, not caring who saw, not caring what anyone thought. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her close. "We did it," she whispered against his chest. "You did it. You and the Reverend and everyone who stood up." Judge Cross cleared his throat. "Ahem. If you two are quite finished, there are some legal matters to settle. Mrs. Sullivan, as the rightful owner of the disputed property, you have decisions to make about its disposition." Kate turned to face the judge, though she kept one hand on Sam's arm. "What kind of decisions?" "Well, there's the matter of the silver deposit. Word's going to get out, and you'll have miners and speculators swarming like locusts. You'll need to file proper claims, establish security, make arrangements for extraction or sale." The thought was overwhelming. Kate had come to Wilcox seeking only a safe harbor, and instead she'd inherited a fortune that brought with it a whole new set of problems. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Take what time you need, but not too much. Blackwood may be checked for the moment, but he won't give up easily. You need to solidify your position before he finds another angle of attack." That evening, back at the Diamond H Ranch, a celebration was underway, despite the lingering dangers. The ranch hands had contributed a steer for roasting Mrs. Price, and the other town women had brought pies and side dishes, and neighbors from surrounding ranches had arrived with jugs of whiskey and beer. Joshua ran among the adults, his laughter bright and carefree for the first time since Sam had been shot. Kate watched him with a smile, glad to see the boy acting like a child again instead of carrying the weight of adult worries. Sam found her on the porch, away from the noise and celebration. His shoulder was still bandaged, but Dr. Sullivan had pronounced him healing well. "You all right?" he asked, settling carefully into the chair beside hers. "I don't know. I won today, but it doesn't feel like a victory. Blackwood's still out there, still dangerous. And now I have this silver mine to deal with, which is going to paint an even bigger target on my back. So sell it. Take the money and go somewhere safe." Kate turned to look at him in the fading light. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" Sam was quiet for a long moment. "No. God help me, no. But I want you to be safe more than I want you to stay." "What if I want both safety and staying?" "I don't know if that's possible, not with Blackwood still around." Kate reached over and took his hand, the gesture that had become so natural between them. "Sam, I need to tell you something. These past few weeks living here, being part of your life and Joshua's life, it's meant more to me than I can properly express. You gave me more than just a job and a roof over my head. You gave me a purpose, a family, a home. I don't want to leave that." Sam's fingers tightened around hers. "Kate, you should know I've been trying to fight this, trying to tell myself it's too soon, that I'm not ready. But the truth is, when I was lying in that bed with fever when I thought I might die, all I could think about was you, about how I'd never get to tell you that you've brought light back into my life, that you've made me remember what it's like to feel something besides grief." Kate's breath caught. "Sam, I know it's only been a few weeks. I know it's crazy. But Kate Sullivan, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already fallen. And I needed you to know that before you make any decisions about leaving." Kate stood, pulling Sam gently to his feet. She cupped his weathered face in her hands, seeing the vulnerability in his gray eyes. "I'm not leaving, Sam Hartford. I love you too. I think I have since the moment you bid on me in that square, even though I was too scared and proud to admit it. I love you, and I love Joshua, and I love this dusty ranch with its stubborn cattle and its leaky roof. This is my home now, and I'm staying." Sam kissed her, then slow and tender, a promise and a beginning. Around them the celebration continued, but for those few moments they were alone in their own world. The kiss was interrupted by Joshua's voice calling from the yard. "Uncle Sam, Miss Kate, come quick." They broke apart to see the boy pointing excitedly at the road. A line of riders was approaching, but these weren't Blackwood's men. Leading them was a tall man with a marshal's star on his chest. Territorial Marshal William Pierce. The man introduced himself as he dismounted. "I'm here about the investigation into Grace Bennett's death and Emmett Blackwood's business practices. Judge Cross sent word by telegraph. Sam and Kate exchanged glances. Help had arrived faster than they'd expected. "Marshal, you're welcome here. What do you need from us?" "Everything you know. Every document, every witness, every piece of evidence. I've been wanting to investigate Blackwood for years, but never had enough cause. Now I do, and I intend to make sure justice is served." Over the next few days, the marshal and his men conducted a thorough investigation. They interviewed witnesses, examined documents, and dug into Blackwood's affairs with dogged determination. What they found was damning. Evidence of land fraud, intimidation, possible murder. Jake Monroe, one of Blackwood's hired guns, agreed to testify in exchange for leniency, confirming that he'd been ordered to set the fire at Grace's shop the night she died. "It was supposed to be empty," Jake said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Just meant to scare her," boss said. "But she was inside. She ran, fell on the stairs, hit her head. By the time we got to her, she was already gone. Boss said to leave her, make it look like she fell at the cabin instead." The testimony was enough for Marshal Pierce to arrest Emmett Blackwood on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft, and a dozen other crimes. The arrest happened at Blackwood's ranch with half the town watching. Kate made sure she was there standing with Sam and Joshua as Blackwood was led away in chains. The man who had terrorized Wilcox for so long looked diminished, somehow smaller, without the power and influence he'd wielded like weapons. As he was loaded into the marshal's wagon, Blackwood's eyes found Kate's. For just a moment, the mask fell completely away, and she saw the broken man beneath. A man who had loved Grace Bennett and been rejected. A man who had let that rejection twist into obsession and greed. Kate felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for all the destruction that pride and wounded ego had wrought. "Mrs. Sullivan," Blackwood called out as the wagon began to move, "Grace would have been proud of you. She was right to trust you with her legacy." Then he was gone, headed to Tucson to await trial. Kate knew she'd likely never see him again, that justice would take its course without her involvement. The chapter was closing. A week later, on a Sunday morning, Kate stood in her best dress outside the small church in Wilcox. Beside her stood Sam, cleaned up and wearing a suit that made him look uncomfortable but distinguished. Joshua fidgeted in his own new clothes, excitement making him almost unable to stand still. Reverend Wade stood at the altar, his face peaceful in a way Kate had never seen before. Testifying against Blackwood had cost him, had brought his past sins to light, but it had also freed him. The congregation had voted to keep him as their minister, recognizing that redemption was possible for all who sought it. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, and Kate felt her heart swell with joy. This was not the marriage of convenience they'd once discussed. This was real, blessed by a community that had come to accept Kate as one of their own, witnessed by friends who had stood with them against tyranny. Sam's vows were simple and heartfelt. "Kate, I promise to stand beside you in all things, to protect what we build together, to raise Joshua as our own, and to love you with everything I have for as long as I live." Kate's voice was steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "Sam, I promise to be your partner in all things, to bring light to the shadows we've both known, to make this ranch a home filled with love and laughter, and to remind you every day that you deserve this happiness we've found together." They exchanged simple gold bands, and when Reverend Wade pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Joshua threw his arms around both of them. "Does this mean Miss Kate is my aunt now?" Sam smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "She's family, Josh. That's all that matters." The celebration that followed was joyous and unrestrained. The whole town turned out, even those who had initially doubted Kate. Tables groaned under the weight of food, music filled the air, and for one perfect day, all the fear and struggle of the past weeks was forgotten. That night, as the last guests departed and Joshua was tucked into bed, Sam and Kate stood on the porch of what was now their ranch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "What will you do about the silver?" Sam asked, his arm around Kate's waist. "I've been thinking about that. The land will stay ours, but I want to establish a proper mining operation with fair wages and safe conditions for the workers, and I want to use part of the profits to improve Wilcox. A new school maybe, a hospital, things that will help the whole community." Grace would approve of that. "I hope so. I hope she'd be proud of what we're building here." Sam pulled her closer. "I think she'd be very proud. You honored her memory by standing up to Blackwood, by refusing to be intimidated or bought off. That took real courage." Kate leaned into his warmth. "I had help. From you, from the town, from people who believed that standing together was better than living in fear alone." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Kate spoke again, her voice soft. "Sam, there's something else. I went to see Dr. Sullivan yesterday." Sam tensed slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Your health." "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." Kate turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Sam, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a long moment Sam just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes filled with tears, and he pulled her into a careful embrace. "A baby," he whispered. "Kate, are you sure?" The doctor confirmed it. "I'm about 6 weeks along." Sam laughed, a sound of pure joy. "We're going to have a baby. Josh is going to have a brother or sister. We're going to be a real family. We already are a real family. This just makes it bigger." They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, as the night sounds of the desert surrounded them, as the ranch they'd fought so hard to protect settled into peaceful sleep around them. 6 months later, in the spring of 1884, Catherine Hartford gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace Sarah Hartford, honoring both the woman who had made their meeting possible and the wife Sam had lost. The baby was healthy and loud, with Sam's gray eyes and Kate's determined chin. Joshua was instantly smitten, appointing himself her protector and hovering over the cradle with the fierce devotion of a big brother. The Diamond H Ranch prospered under Sam and Kate's joint stewardship. The silver mine on Kate's inherited land brought steady income managed by honest foremen and worked by men paid fair wages. True to her word, Kate used the profits to improve Wilcox, funding a new school and a small hospital. The town itself had changed in the months since Blackwood's arrest and trial. Without his shadow hanging over it, Wilcox began to thrive. New businesses opened, families moved in, and the sense of fear that had gripped the community for so long finally lifted. Emmett Blackwood was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Kate never visited him, never sought to gloat over his downfall. She let justice take its course and focused instead on building the life she and Sam had claimed for themselves. On warm evenings, Kate would sit on the porch with baby Grace in her arms, Joshua at her feet playing with his wooden horses, and Sam beside her, working on tack or accounts. They would watch the sun set over land that was theirs, truly theirs, bought with courage and defended with community. Sometimes Kate thought about the woman she'd been when she'd first stepped off that stagecoach in Wilcox, that desperate widow with nothing but a faded letter and tattered pride. She barely recognized that woman now. The frontier had not been kind to her, but it had been honest. It had stripped away everything superficial and revealed what truly mattered: family, home, the courage to stand up for what was right, the strength found in community. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked one evening, noticing the distant look in her eyes. Kate smiled, kissing the top of Grace's downy head. "About how I came here with nothing and found everything. About how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in our lives." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one. You—" Sam pulled her close with his free arm, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Just one. That I didn't meet you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. We have now. We have the future. That's enough." Joshua looked up from his play. "Pa, will you tell us the story again, about how you saved Ma at the auction?" Sam and Kate exchanged amused glances. The tale had already become legend in the Hartford household, embellished with each telling. "Your pa didn't save me," Kate corrected gently. "We saved each other. That's how the best stories work." Joshua considered this solemnly. "I like that better. Can I have a cookie now?" Their laughter filled the desert evening, carried on the wind across land that had known violence and greed, but had chosen to embrace justice and love instead. 2 years after their wedding, Judge Benjamin Cross paid a visit to the Diamond H. He was nearing retirement, he told them, and wanted to see with his own eyes how the Bennett inheritance had turned out. "I knew Grace for 30 years, he said, sitting in their comfortable parlor with little Grace toddling around his feet. "Watched her build her business, watched her stand up to every bully and scheme that came her way. She'd be so proud of what you've built here, Kate. Not just the mine or the improvements to town, but this family, this home." "I wish I'd known her better," Kate said. "I only have scattered memories from childhood. She talked about you often, worried about you back in Boston, hoped you'd find happiness. When she made her will, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'Catherine has my blood, Ben. She's stronger than she knows. When the time comes, she'll prove it.' Looks like Grace knew what she was talking about." The judge's visit was followed by others. Neighbors who had once viewed Kate with suspicion now sought her advice and friendship. Ranch owners consulted Sam on water rights and range management. The Hartfords became pillars of the community, their word respected, their example followed. When Joshua turned 12, Sam began teaching him the finer points of ranch management, preparing him for the day when the Diamond H would be his responsibility. The boy took to it naturally, showing the same steady reliability and quiet strength that characterized his uncle. And little Grace grew into a whirlwind of energy and determination, showing early signs of the Bennett stubbornness that had served her mother and great-aunt so well. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sam presented Kate with a gift. It was a newly painted sign for the ranch, crafted from sturdy oak and carved with careful lettering. "Diamond H Ranch," Kate read aloud. "Hartford and Bennett, established 1883. "Seemed only right," Sam said. "This place is as much yours as it is mine. More maybe, since it was your courage that saved it." Kate traced the letters with her fingers, feeling the smooth wood under her touch. "Our courage. Together." That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch had settled into quiet, Kate and Sam sat on their porch as they had on so many evenings. But this time Kate pulled out a letter she'd been composing. "I'm writing to the territorial governor," she explained, "proposing legislation to protect property rights for women, especially widows. Too many women lose everything when their husbands die, and there's no legal protection. I want to change that." Sam smiled. "Taking on the whole territory now." "Someone has to. If Aunt Grace taught me anything, it's that you don't wait for someone else to fix injustice. You fix it yourself. That's my Kate. Never thinking small. Our daughters shouldn't have to fight the battles we fought. Grace should grow up in a world where her rights are protected, where her property can't be stolen just because she's a woman." Sam took her hand, his weathered fingers intertwining with hers. "Then we'll fight for that world, together." As the stars emerged overhead and the desert night wrapped around them like a blessing, Kate reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the auction block to the owner of a thriving ranch, from a desperate widow to a woman with purpose and power, from alone to surrounded by love. The frontier had tested her, had demanded everything she had to give. But in return, it had given her something she'd never had in Boston's gilded mansions and society ballrooms. It had given her freedom. The freedom to be strong, to be capable, to be exactly who she was meant to be. And it had given her love, real love, built on respect and partnership and shared struggle. Years later, when Grace Hartford was old enough to understand, she would ask her mother to tell her the story of how she came to Arizona. And Kate would tell her about a brave aunt who left her a legacy, about a courageous man who stood up when no one else would, and about a town that learned to fight back against tyranny. But most of all, she would tell her about how sometimes the worst moments of your life are actually the beginning of your best ones. How losing everything can teach you what truly matters. How the woman you're meant to be often only emerges when the woman you were is stripped away. And as she told these stories sitting on the porch of the ranch that had become her fortress and her haven, Kate would look out over land she had fought for and won, at a family she had helped create, at a life she had built with her own hands and heart. The frontier had made her strong. Love had made her whole. And justice, hard won and dearly bought, had made it all possible. This was her legacy. This was her home. This was the life Catherine Sullivan Hartford had claimed for herself when she stood on that auction block and refused to break. And it was a life worth every moment of struggle, every tear shed, every battle fought. It was a life of redemption, not just for her, but for everyone who had stood with her. For Sam, who had learned to love again. For Joshua, who had found a complete family. For a whole town that had discovered its courage. The gunshot that had saved her life that day in Wilcox had done more than stop a kidnapping. It had started a revolution small but significant in one corner of the Arizona Territory. And that revolution's name was hope. Hope that the future could be better than the past. Hope that standing together was stronger than standing alone. Hope that love and justice, though often tested, would ultimately prevail. As Kate Hartford sat on her porch that evening, her husband beside her and her children safe in their beds, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home.